Good afternoon and good morning. So first, good morning in the US, so in Austin, in Texas, and as well good afternoon in Brno, in the Czech Republic. So today we have a match between two teams from two universities in the Group F in the Inter-University Law Debate Tournament organized by the Coax Foundation. These two teams, this is our third match, so it means that it is a conclusion of the group phase for these two teams. Masaryk University and the University of Texas at Austin. So I give the floor to my colleague.
Thank you very much. So really welcome to the debate today. Welcome to day 3. I will be passing the floor, of course, before we find out the positions for the two teams for the introductions. But just a short reminder, the debate today will focus on whether or not global banks must not block financial services to entities unless proven responsible for serious violations of international law. But again, for the introductions first, from the University of Texas at Austin, Ms. Feinstein.
Hello. Thank you so much for having us here. We're all very excited to debate today.
You're welcome. For Masaryk University, Ms. Czepiczkova.
Hi, thank you for having us, and we're excited for the third match of the group phase.
Welcome. And Mr. O'Rourke from University of Texas at Austin.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here today and debate.
Welcome, Ms. Tomikova from Masaryk University.
Hello, thank you for having us, and good luck to us all.
Thank you. And Ms. Rashpatak from University of Texas at Austin.
Thank you guys for having us. We're so grateful to be here.
Welcome. Also, big thank you to the 3 judges that will be reviewing, or perhaps already are reviewing this match for the day 3, and also to the support team for the teams. So for Masaryk University, it's Professor Schwartz, I believe, and for University of Texas at Austin, it is Dr. Benke and Mr. Dill. So in a short moment, you should be able to see the wheel for the allocation of positions for my colleague's screen.
Yes, you can see. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see, there are 2 possibilities for the 2 teams to be in favor or to be against the motion. The team will be in favor, will be starting the match with the first introduction of 4 minutes. So for this match, the University of Texas at Austin will be against the motion. As a conclusion, as a consequence, sorry, the Masaryk University will be in favor and will be starting the match with the first introduction. So Masaryk University will be defending the position that global banks must not block financial services to entities unless proven responsible for serious violations of international law. While the University of Texas at Austin will defend the position that global banks must block financial services to entities unless proven responsible for serious violation of international law. So now you will have 5 minutes to review your notes, and then we'll hear the introduction by Masaryk University.
you very much. The final preparation time is now over. We will be starting by hearing the opening statements. Just a short reminder, the yellow card indicates 30 seconds left of your speaking time. Red card indicates the speaking time being up. And the for in favor statement by Masaryk University defending the topic that global banks must not block financial services to entities unless proven responsible for serious violations of international law. Masaryk University, you will now have 4 minutes.
Honorable judges, esteemed colleagues, today we argue that power over global financial system must be tethered to the rule of law. Global banks must not block financial services unless an entity is proven responsible for serious violations of international law. Under the Council of Europe, Strasbourg, and Warsaw Conventions, the mechanisms for searching, seizing, and confiscating proceeds of crime are clearly defined as judicial processes. These treaties provide a framework where due process is vital. When banks block accounts based on suspicion or internal risk parameters, they are acting as extrajudicial tribunals. The World Bank has issued stark warnings regarding the trend of de-risking. Global financial institutions are increasingly terminating business relationships with entire regions, particularly in developing economies, to avoid any proximity to potential money laundering or terrorism financing. As the World Bank notes, this does not actually make the world safer. Instead, it creates a black hole where local banks and remittance companies are cut off from the global core. This is a form of collective punishment that targets the innocent to avoid the administrative costs of identifying the guilty. By requiring a proven violation, we force banks to return to their core mandate as defined by the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, to manage risk, not to wholesale abandon it. The European Parliament and the European Banking Authority, EBA, have documented how over-compliance and arbitrary blocking have paralyzed non-profit organizations and humanitarian aid corridors. When a bank blocks a service to a non-profit operating in a high-risk zone without a proven violation of law, they are effectively vetoing the humanitarian goals of the international community. Access to the SWIFT network should not be a weapon wielded by private entities at their own discretion. It is a utility, and its withdrawal must be reserved for those who have fundamentally broken the international social contract. The current sanctions review environment, such as the enforcement of Office of Foreign Assets Control lists, have created a climate of fear. While security is vital, the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, research highlights an international perspective on de-risking that shows a growing divide between the US, the UK, and the EU approaches. These are often misaligned, leaving entities caught in a jurisdictional vacuum. Only a unified standard, proven violations of international law, can provide the legal certainty required for global commerce to flourish without the threat of arbitrary exclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear the opening statements for the against position by University of Texas at Austin.
Thank you to our esteemed judges and opponents from Czechia for joining us in today's debate. We are proud to negate the topic that global banks must not block financial services to entities unless proven responsible for serious violations of international law. Before introducing our points, we would like to define some phrases in the topic. Since our opponents have not defined any phrases, you must evaluate our definitions. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and articles on responsibility of states for internationally wrongful acts define serious violations of international law as jus cogens violations are those related to genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and/or crimes against aggression. And global banks are limited to those listed in the annual report published by the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. As of 2025, the latest publication, there are only 29 banks relevant to today's debate. The first point in negation of today's topic is that if banks are asked to wait for proof of serious violations of international law, they place themselves under financial risk and risk funding harmful entities. Our opponents have overemphasized the idea of due process and miss key legal doctrines grounded in the International Court of Justice rulings. Banks must instead operate under the precautionary principle, where they minimize risk to protect their assets and constituents. The use of the precautionary principle has a legal precedent as opposed to requiring absolute proof of a violation. In 2010, the ICJ ruled in the pulp mills on the River Uruguay that to solve an industrial pollution risk, states had preventative environmental duties even under scientific uncertainty. Similarly, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea ruled in 1999 that due to irreversible nature of international harm from overfishing, urgent preventative measures needed to be taken as precaution even before violations were proven. Additionally, UN Security Resolution 1373 obliges states and banks to prevent terrorist financing or financial services for serious crime, emphasizing preventative action, not waiting for full proof of wrongdoing. Our second point in today's debate is that banks may be required to facilitate atrocities that do not satisfy the requirement of serious violations. As our Rome Statute, Article 5 and Article 14 of the Articles of Responsibility of States definition that we stated earlier say, serious crimes only constitute genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and/or crimes of aggression. This means that banks would still be required to finance other crimes such as theft, embezzlement, money laundering, political fraud, and drug trafficking. But global banks would still finance these entities, leading to significant harm in the long term. The third point in today's debate is that banks would face conflicting liabilities under the affirmation standards and therefore must be permitted to block services without judicial proof. In domestic courts, for example, banks have a legal obligation to comply with sanctions and anti-money laundering regimes, regardless of whether the targeted entity has been judicially proven to have violated international law. For example, in United States versus Attila, a bank executive was convicted for conspiring to evade sanctions against Iran. And in JAM versus International Finance Corps, the United States Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of lawsuits against international financial institutions such as the World Bank for harmful commercial activities. Issues like sanctions violations and money laundering are unlikely to meet the threshold of a serious violation of international law, which means that under international law, a bank would be simultaneously be prohibited from withholding financial services even when obligated by domestic regulations to do so. This is not only an impossible standard for any bank to meet, but also underscores our core argument in today's debate that not only morally, but legally obliged to act proactively, waiting for proof may enable atrocities. For these reasons, we urge that you negate today's topic. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear the first rebuttal for the in favor position. Masaryk University, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Honorable judges, opponents, this argument ignores the current situation that is happening right now. Currently, the high-risk labels and FTF blacklisting are often perceived as tools of Western policy rather than objective legal standards. When a bank blocks an entity based on a unilateral sanction list without proven violation of international law, it erodes the legitimacy of the global financial structure. On FTF, the blacklisting is also iron because of the current situation. But we must look at the tree as rotten right away and not see the few good apples in it. What if there is a kind businessman that wants to sell, for example, medicine of a very good quality and his clients are iron women? Would you freeze his bank account because he helps iron women to have access to medicine that could very much mean difference between life and death? Because the bank could evaluate the payments for medicine as dangerous payments because it is simply from iron and the businessman has no means to defend himself. If the goal is truly the defense of human rights, we must just use the system that violates the rights of the innocent through guilt by association or geographic proximity. The moral dilemma isn't security versus rights, it's state power versus individual due process. By encouraging exclusion to international law, we ensure that sanctions are a legitimate expression of global consensus, not a unilateral act of economic welfare by private corporations. Thank you.
Thank you. For the first rebuttal in the against position, University of Texas at Austin.
Honorable opponents and esteemed judges, we are proud to negate today's topic. We contend that using the standard of jus cogens violations would undermine international sanctions regimes. Requiring a violation of international law would create a legal gap where entities could get away with grave wrongdoings that fall below the threshold, such as nuclear proliferation, terrorism financing, annexation or illegal application, serious corruption, or repression of citizens that does not rise to the level of crimes against humanity. Sanctions against these crimes are necessary not just to punish atrocities, but also to prevent dispute escalation, which means that they are less characteristic of collective punishment, but more so precautionary measures to ensure that the international community is not funding the very human rights violations that it is required to protect. Further, requiring proof of serious crime is a much more difficult standard to reach. So by the time that a violation has been proven, banks will be unable to sanction. International Court of Justice cases can often take 3 to 5 years to reach a final judgment, or even up to 14 years, such as in Bosnia v. Serbia, which means that a strict standard of waiting for proof or assignment of responsibility may allow funds to support war crimes and terrorism in the meantime. Finally, allowing global banks to fund at their own discretion does not undermine due process or cause collective punishment, as the International Court of Justice will continue to uphold those standards for assigning their own responsibility to serious crimes. Our contention is that the way that banks operate should be separate from this, because their definition from the Council of Europe is in the context of taking proceeds from illegal actions, whereas funding from a global bank are not profits from illegal activities, but rather the funds that enable such harmful activities in the first place. Therefore, this strategy would be less indicative of taking away profits from illegal activities, but rather enabling them in the first place, which means that it is unethical to even risk banks funding these activities, particularly if they would rather de-risk.
Thank you very much. For the second rebuttal for the in favor position.
Dear judges, honorable opponents, we think that the process is very long. The jurisdictional process is very long, and we need to do action now. We don't need it for 14 years. Like the Iran women are waiting for the medicine now, not in 14 years before the court decides that it was unjustified. So we think that it should have some kind of listings that so that the banks couldn't be doing this by themselves. Also, Gulbakian may argue that banks must act before a crime is proven to prevent the flow of funds to terrorists or organized crime. However, this logic is fundamentally flawed and empirically dangerous. As the European Banking Authority pointed out, that their de-risking fact sheets, unwanted de-risking is a sign of poor management, not high security. When you block legitimate entities because they are difficult to monitor, you don't stop the crime. You drive it into the shadows. By cutting off access to the regulated banking sector, banks force entities into unregulated crypto exchanges and shadow banking networks. This creates a paradox. The very act of blocking without proof makes the financial system less transparent and more dangerous for law enforcement. If we recover a proven violation before a total block, we keep the money within the light of a regulated system where it can be monitored. Suspicion should trigger intense monitoring, not a total blockade. Thank you.
Thank you. For the second rebuttal in the against position.
Thank you to our opponents for their perspective. While we agree that legal certainty is necessary, this is precisely why we contend that requiring proof of wrongdoing to de-risk funds would be an untenable legal standard, as banks have a legal obligation to comply with sanctions and anti-money money laundering regimes, neither of which rise to the level of Jus Cogens violations, which means that it is more likely that under the affirmation standard, banks would either become less transparent in order to meet their conflicting obligations under international and domestic laws, or they would be unable to provide funds for anything in the first place. This means that banks would have conflicting responsibilities under the law, which are also violations under the Financial Action Task Force Recommendation 10 of Customer Due Diligence and the Financial Action Task Force's Recommendation 6, which talks about targeted financial sanctions. This makes banking relatively impossible. However, they also bring up the example of providing medicine to people in need as a form of collective punishment. However, under our standard, banks would still have the discretion to provide medicine or do activities that they view as moral in and of themselves. However, we are here to debate today whether banks must cut off funding if and only in the scenarios after which the International Court of Justice has reached a verdict, which can take up to 14 years, which means that in those 14 years, we can have legitimate international funds funding actual financial crimes. Even if the ICJ reaches the proper conviction, the standard of being able to cut off funds for banks is far too high. Requiring a Jus Cogens violation will allow entities to get away with crimes that do not reach that threshold, but will require banks to continue funding terrorism activities and money laundering, even if there has been proof that those activities were engaged in, which means that this position is not due process, but rather an unfair standard to hold banks to that would result in the funding of international crimes. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to hear the concluding statements for the in favor position, Masaryk University.
Honorable judges, esteemed opponents, we have established that the current practice of arbitrary financial exclusion is a failure of both law and economics. We have shown that, first, de-risking is a blunt instrument that, according to the World Bank, devastates emerging economies and leaves the world's most vulnerable without a financial lifeline. Second, the Basel Committee and EBA guidelines are being ignored in favor of a zero-risk posture that drives financial crime underground. And third, the Strasbourg and Warsaw Conventions provide the proper path, judicial oversight and proven culpability. The resolution before us asks us to choose between two worlds. In one, a small group can decide with no legal basis on what is right and what is wrong, destroy a business or a charity based on a risk score. In the other, the deprivation of financial rights is a serious act that requires serious evidence of a serious crime. By requiring that global banks only block services upon a proven violation of international law, we protect the integrity of the system, and we also prevent arbitrary account freezing. Security is not the absence of risk. It is the presence of justice. We must stop treating the global financial network as a private club and start treating it as the public utility it has become. For the sake of global equity, legal consistency, and the preservation of human rights, we urge you to support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. For the concluding statements in the against position, 2 minutes.
Thank you, judges, and thank you to our opponents for their arguments. First, I want to acknowledge that both the affirmation and the negation agree that global banks play a critical role in maintaining the integrity of the international financial system and preventing harm. However, our team has demonstrated that the affirmation's approach of allowing banks to restrict financial services without proven violations of international law fails to balance this responsibility with fundamental legal protections. While the affirmation brings up very interesting arguments, international legal precedence ultimately supports our stance. The affirmation cites the importance of banks maintaining rigidity as their tools of Western policy. Yet, international legal doctrine supports our perspective, where frameworks like the International Financial Action Task Force require banks to act on risk and not wait for the legal proof and demonstrate that it allows banks to respond to risk and engage in the precautionary principle. If we impose a proof standard, we're asking banks to ignore real time threats until it is much too late. Next, the affirmation tells you that bank discretion causes harm, but our team has demonstrated the opposite. When banks cannot manage risk, as they do in the world of the affirmation, they engage in de risking, where they withdraw entirely from high risk regions. Institutions like the World Bank have warned that this cuts off financial access and disrupts the flow of aid. But if de risking is a blunt instrument, requiring just Kogan's violations completely handcuffs international law and forces it to be wielded to fund atrocities. Even if the ICJ determines an entity to be guilty after a 3 to 5 year process, if that crime doesn't reach the just Kogan standards, that's not justice, it's the opposite, where international funds themselves are providing the funds to undermine human rights. We cannot evaluate moral arguments when they're in direct contrast with legal precedents. And it's for these reasons that we urge you to negate, because our model advocates for the rights of our people to be able to advocate for the most and realistic model to make sure that we're advocating for justice of the people around us.
Thank you. Thank you to both teams for your concluding statements. You can all now relax. You are no longer graded after this part. And this officially marks the end of your day 3 debate in the Hague Inter-University Law Debate Tournament 2026. So really congratulations. As always, the judges do have the time to review the match and submit the scores. We will communicate them to you once we have them, of course. But already now, we would like to give you the floor for reflections on the debate, perhaps on the research part or the exchange today, if you maybe heard familiar arguments, and perhaps to what extent were you familiar with the topic as a whole or its aspects. First, to the team of University of Texas at Austin, Ms. Feinstein.
Yes, thank you for having us for today's debate. I felt like we all learned a lot because I don't think that any of us on our team had really had much familiarity with the standards for when global banks are and aren't permitted to fund certain governments or entities. So I think we learned a lot in the process of researching this and what those different obligations under international law looked like. For me, it was really interesting trying to kind of square the obligations they have under international law with obligations that they might have to domestic jurisdictions as well.
Thank you. Same question to Ms. Chepichkova of Masaryk University.
It was a very interesting topic for me because I also didn't know anything about the international banking law. So I feel like I learned a lot. And it's, for me, since this is the third debate, it's interesting to see how maybe my approach to research and also the debate changed throughout the competition.
Thank you. Mr. O'Rourke from University of Texas.
I also really enjoyed this topic. I think the wording of the topic also led to a lot of interesting research and debate, even between myself and my teammates, because the word, the phrase must not and also unless, created a lot of different kind of grammatical nuances, which made it difficult sometimes to know whether an argument was in support or not in support of the topic. So I think that was also something that was interesting to research and kind of navigate through.
Same question to Ms. Tomikova.
I really enjoyed this debate. Really, all of you were very good. And I think that this topic was a little bit familiar to me because we discussed it last week in a class with our teacher. So yeah, I think I kind of was invested in this topic. So yeah, it was kind of good for me.
Thank you. And Ms. Rashpatak.
I definitely think that this was one of my favorite topics that we've debated so far. I think similar to Dominica, as she just said, I really enjoyed this topic because I think international econ is a very interesting topic to discuss. I'm not super familiar with it, but I've definitely read into it given, the state of the world and everything. So I think it was really interesting to be able to apply a lot of that to our research. So that was really fun.
Thank you. And indeed, it's been a pleasure to be able to observe your teams as you progressed from day 1 to day 3. And definitely the progress, you have felt it, we have been able to see it, and thank you for that. And on that note, between day 1 and day 3, so far in your participation, is there anyone you would like to give a shout out to that perhaps encouraged you, supported you, or otherwise motivated you? And that's the first to the team University of Texas at Austin.
Yes. We would definitely like to thank our coaches, Dr. Binky and Ian Dill. They've been really supportive throughout the whole process and have been very helpful in just motivating us, pushing us to try something new, as all three of us didn't have much exposure to international law before these debates. So we really appreciate them.
Thank you. For your teammates, if you want to add.
LJ put that really well. I was also going to thank Dr. Banky and Ian, so LJ said it really well.
For the same question to Masaryk University.
We would like to thank our coach as well as like our the opposition already did. So Dr. Schwetz helped us like throughout the competition and was very supportive. And I would also like to give a shout out to my teammate because I think she grew a lot, and it's been amazing to discuss the law behind the debates and see her grow. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I really loved working with you too. And also I would like to thank my friends and my boyfriend because they were very supportive with me during the debate.
Well then, guys, and before we wrap up for the day 3, which also concludes the group phase for the 2 teams, between the 3 rounds, and of course, in the course of your studies, you have encountered different areas of law, different aspects, either through case law or through the legislation that you might have been discussing or studying for. And do you perhaps already have an area of law that interests you to learn more about, perhaps a particular legal system or an international organization that you would like to either interact with more or study more about? And this time first to Masaryk University team.
I'm in year 3 of my studies, so I'm still deciding what I want to pursue in the future. But at the moment, I would like to learn more about investment arbitration and international law as a whole.
Well, for me, I am always like into family law, so it's a family law forever for me still.
Right. Same question to University of Texas at Austin team.
I've been pretty interested in understanding corporate law, so this topic was definitely interesting to look into, but something that I wasn't aware of before this tournament was the international law legal frameworks governing cross-border cooperations, which was our first day 1 debate topic, actually. And so I would actually be really interested to look into how those actually play out and the different cooperations between different countries internationally.
I'm really interested in topics surrounding intellectual property and especially emerging technologies and kind of how, especially with the rise of things like AI and stuff like that, about how those kind of interact with law.
I think these past couple topics have really piqued my interest in what the ICC and ICJ are doing. I think it's really interesting to see how they're making rulings on a lot of the biggest conflicts we're seeing between geopolitical actors, and I'm very interested to see how that works out.
So just a tiny note, after the group phase is over for the Hague International Inter-University Law Debate Tournament, we have a mid-edition break, during which there is a networking activity for the teams. And you have quite a few fellow students that are interested in the same areas as yourselves and coming from all different jurisdictions. So really, we would encourage you to also keep in contact, of course, with the teams you have met so far, but it is another good way to meet fellows for your future career growth. So, and of course, just in general, sharing the experience that you have had so far through the debates. And more information on this will come through the emails, but for now I pass to Professor Lohanch to wrap us off.
Yes, so congratulations for this match, and that was extremely, I would say, enjoyable to see how much you went into the research of the topic, especially because yes, it was something quite technical and maybe new for some of you. And yes, so during the next days, there will be the result of this match, and you will be informed about it, of course, before we inform publicly about the result of the match. And for the rest, of course, we encourage you to keep contact. So if you come to Europe, for example, from Texas, or if you come actually from Brno and you go to the US, and you might, maybe in Texas or somewhere else, actually, you might meet some persons you have met as well already through the competition, please. Yeah, you can already know that you have this in common, this competition that you have competed in. So yes, congratulations again, and of course we see you soon, of course, very soon for the networking event. Thank you. Bye bye.